everybody, welcome to this November issue of Staffing Monthly. And I am really thankful to have our guest here on the show today, who is Hannah MacDonald. And she is somebody that you may not have heard of yet. And if you haven't, take note of the name because she is one of the emerging leaders in this industry. And she has a very interesting perspective that you should pay attention to. But before we get to that, I just want to talk to you a little bit about who she is. So she is just coming up in this industry, but she is actually part of a family group that owns multiple staffing agencies between Canada and the United States. And she has a very interesting perspective because she is of the Gen Z. And I actually wanted to invite Hannah on the show because I followed some of her writings. I followed some of her kind of thoughtful inspirations of the industry. And I wanted to pick her brain from the Gen Z perspective of how she sees our industry, where it's going, and what her biggest takeaways for staffing world were. And Hannah, I'm just grateful to have you here on the show today. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, I am so thankful for you having me on. I'm super excited to chat with you, Dan. I always have a lovely time when we get the opportunity to connect. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. So you just came back from Staffing World not too long ago. And was it your
Yes,
first one or
sir.
had you been there before?
No, that was my first staffing world. That was nearly my first American conference. We've done a lot of Canadian stuff, but it was quite interesting kind of coming into the vastness that was.
Interesting. So we've got a lot of Canadian followers with Staffing Monthly. It's fairly global. So just really quickly before I ask the big question, just paint a picture. You said you've done a bunch of Canadian conferences. How does Staffing World compare to anything you'd seen prior? And would you recommend Canadians or other people from around the world trying to make their way to Staffing World next year?
Oh gosh, absolutely, I would. Absolutely, I would. I would say Staffing World was insane. It was great in all of the best ways. It was huge. It was bigger, better, faster, stronger, kind of what you would imagine an American conference in Vegas to be like. It was just jam-packed with some incredible speakers and some really valuable information for the industry at whole. So I would say, yeah, if you're Canadian and kind of looking for some interesting conferences to attend in the upcoming years, Staffing World should probably be on your radar.
Awesome. Awesome. I think it should be on anyone's radar if they're in the industry. But the
Hmm.
main thing that I wanted to take away, because I've been to a lot of different staffing conferences over the years, and I feel like most of them play from the same playbook, and I feel like rightfully so. I think they cater to the traditionalists of the industry, but there's been a shift, and Gen Z is a big catalyst for that shift. And I was really curious to ask you this question. Being, Gen Z yourself and coming up in this industry, with the Gen Z perspective, what were your biggest takeaways from Staffing World this year?
Yeah, I would say one of the largest things that I took away from Staffing World this year was that the staffing industry is 2% of the overall job market in the US. And that just boggles my mind because I understand and had the pleasure of seeing how large and intense this industry is at Staffing World. And so it was very interesting to hear that stat. And so for me, the thing that I took away from Staffing World, specifically from a Gen Zer's perspective, was just how insane technology is going to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years and what that's going to do for our staffing industry. So it that was kind of really my largest takeaway was learning about some of the technology and getting to be in the exhibition hall and seeing where that per diem temp one day in, one day out kind of staffing world is going to evolve to be. And that was so interesting for me.
I I agree, and I've been seeing that model emerge since gig economy really started to, I would say, go mainstream like 3, 4 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, I've seen that. So what? So if that was your perspective, if that's what you took away from it, what was? Do you think it's just an overlap between gig economy and the staffing industry, sort of adapting to I don't want to say maintain or control, but maybe like leverage that type of workforce? Is like you think that's why it's happening?
I don't know about that. I think that really just the upcoming generation, so my generation of Gen Zers really value the concept of flexibility. And perhaps your generation was really valuing the concept of a high paying salary or the best pay rate you could possibly get. They're trying to sustain a quality of life. And then the people before them, so my grandparents were really trying to sustain um, consistency. They wanted a good job that had them at the same place every day, that they took a paycheck home from every single week, and they needed that consistency. And then my generation really just wants flexibility. They can live in their parents' house, they can live in their grandparents' house. They don't need the most money, they don't need the consistency. We're never going to be able to buy houses ourselves. It's insane. And so for my generation, what we're valuing, what we're craving is flexibility. And the staffing world has so much flexibility to offer. And so in those kind of day by day shifts type opportunities, such as Uber or DoorDash or anything like that, they have been offered to the unskilled demographic for a really long time. But in upcoming years, there's going to be so many more opportunities for skilled workers to have the same type of platform to utilize to find their own jobs. And so I think that that's kind of where that key came in of this generation wants that flexibility. And because of the technology that will be offered in the upcoming years, I think they'll pair really nicely together and
So
really
that's
just kind of boom the staffing economy much past that 2% that we're seeing today.
that's really really interesting because the gig economy. I think the last stat that I saw was that somewhere between 25 and 50% of the total workforce ex- participated in the gig economy in some way, shape, or form. So I think you're right. I think that is an opportunity for growth if the staffing industry can tap into the gig economy. But one thing I want to point out that you mentioned, and you did call it out about not ever being able to afford a house, but I find it interesting that you're right. The generation before mine was all about stability. I think my generation was really about that, high income earning. And I do agree that Gen Z is in that flexibility state. But like how I feel like there's a perspective out in the marketplace that Gen Zers all want that flexibility, yet the media paints them in a way of always complaining about not being able to make enough money. So how do you really balance having the flexibility you want and making enough money to have the lifestyle that's like insta worthy?
That is a great question, and that I would love to know the answer to. And I can kind of spew off some of the things that really come to mind. I think that I don't know that people my age really want to make the most money. And that's really hard for me to say because I do. Like
Yeah,
I am a part of that mindset that I will continue to push for the best salary for myself because I do value that. But I don't know that I see that through the majority of my population. And population is not the right word, but perhaps peers is a better term. They want money. Everybody wants money. Like it's just nice to have. But more than that, they really do crave flexibility. And I think that the draw for money, the concept of that comes so much more just from the place that our economy is at today and the way that everything is increased in price. So that's just naturally going to be at the forefront of their thought, the same way that it is for any generation who's looking for a pay increase, just based on the way that the world has changed. And so, while I do think that that's valuable and I do think that it's important and that they do want to be paid well and compensated for what they're doing, I don't think that it's the driving factor. I think that flexibility really is.
that's fascinating, and I'll be curious to see. And I want to go back to the technology piece. So I'll be curious to see if the rising cost of everything and the economic pinch that this generation feels, if it reprioritizes that, because at some point
Yeah.
you prioritize based on the pain, right? So I'll be curious to see where that goes. But so you said the vendors and the exhibition halls and seeing this technology. Was there a specific technology or company that jumped out to you that you thought might be a player in this space, really helping the staffing industry best overlap with the gig economy and the scheduling of flexible shifts?
Oh gosh, a specific company that sticks out. That's a great question. I would say there's one company called Springboard that we met, and I believe, don't quote me on this, I could be wrong. Springboard and this other company called Gale, I believe, are two partners that are coming together. And we've been talking a lot with them just in the process of coming into the United States and kind of learning more about this demographic and all that it has to offer. And so we've been chatting with them a lot in regards to the platforms they're creating for nursing specifically is really what they're looking at. But the platforms that they're creating for day-to-day payments and day-to-day picking up of shifts. That was a bad way to say it. But I think that just based on what
Yeah.
we've seen with their interface, it looks like it's going to be an incredible platform and they are just starting out. And so I'll be really excited to see what happens with them and that company specifically through the next couple of years as they really change and tweak their technology to be the best version it can be.
That's an interesting thing. And you mentioned you alluded to like the same day pay. And this has been on my mind. I've always been curious, how important is same day pay? Like, do you think that for Gen Z specifically, do you think that if staffing agencies having to have a same day pay option, do you think that that's something that's going to be mainstream, craved, demanded, like a competitive advantage to get more talent? Or do you think that that's just like a meh?
Yeah, well, I would say, how about this actually? How about I ask you, when you were my age and you ordered something, how long would it typically take? You ordered something online or in a store,
I was going
whichever
to say
the
when I was your age, there
situation.
wasn't online.
Okay, so not online, not online, just in a store. But the time that you were my age and you ordered something in a store, how long would that typically take to come to you?
Jeez,
It obviously would depend on what you're
probably
getting, but a day, a week, a month.
probably a week and a half, maybe. I'd say like 7 to 10 business days. I feel like was the thing back then.
Okay. And if you go on Amazon today and you order something, how long is it going to be until that something gets shipped to your front door?
It depends on what it is. Again, still, I mean, there's things that I've ordered that have taken weeks to get to me, inexplicably based on
But
like,
on an
but
average consumer's basis, just a typical
yeah,
product that you would be purchasing.
usually next day, usually.
So I would say that that's kind of the answer to your question. Your generation has great experience receiving things in a week or 2 week basis. My generation has experienced receiving things within an hour to 24, 48 hours. And
Yeah.
so my generation doesn't know how to wait. We're not good at it. We've never had to do it, and we're not going to have to do it moving forward. And so I would suggest that yes, if you really want to cater to a Gen Z market, same day pay or next day pay would be incredibly valuable to upping your candidate percentage. They'll want to come back to you more. They get their money faster.
And that really is interesting because I do know that there's pay cards out there that have pushed same day pay. I know there's mobile applications that you can get for the staffing industry that are integrating same day pay. I even know there's other staffing software, ATS category software that are building in, same day pay. So like I do see that going, but I've always been wondering because again, I'm patient. If I order a book or a product or something on Amazon, like I'm like, okay. But maybe it's because I'm actually still getting stuff like every day from Amazon because like it's just stuff I ordered a few days ago. So I'm like, oh, I got a new thing, right? And and because I forget what I ordered, it's always like a surprise. Christmas in July, right? But
Nice.
that's a good perspective. I mean, it really is thoughtful to think that you're not used to having to wait 7 to 10 days, which 7 days is pretty much the pay cycle. Wow,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
We're not typically used to that. It's just the way that we were raised. And so I think that yeah, for staffing agencies in the future, not to say that you can't retain employees if you're paying them weekly or biweekly, but that will just have a much bigger role to play, I think, than it does today as my generation continues to escalate further into the cycle.
I do agree with that. The way that you shared that, I think, is pushed my belief that way. I think that was really insightful for me. And if you're an agency out there that gets it the same way, you should probably look at doing it now, right? Like figure out how to do it right now and integrate it. Because again, wage and hour laws are a little bit tricky. So figuring out how to do the same day pay and then balancing accruals and also it's gonna be a little bit tricky. So like I think getting ahead of it and figuring out now and finding software partners to do it, but also it overlaps with what you just said. Like gig economy people, like they want to be paid. Like if they worked today, right, and they did one shift at one opportunity today, they don't want to wait until like next Friday. They don't want to wait 7 to 10 days to get paid for today's work if they're not going to go work tomorrow. So I feel
Yeah.
like if that is the emerging category, same day pay is going to be huge. And if people are pinched for money, like economically, and like they crave flexibility and everything's expensive, they are going to need their money sooner. So I think that's a really good perspective that you shared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you kind of tied that all back together to how the economy is rolling through and what that will really do to people because you're right. Someone might in my generation pick up a shift the morning of, knowing that their bank account is at zero and they need to feed their kids that night. And so they're like, okay, let me hop on this app because I have it. Let me look through all of these jobs that I have been pre-scheduled and know how to do and pick one and then just go do it. Same way that substitute teachers pick up shifts or anything like that. It's just I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves, but I really do think
That's
that that will be the way of the future for staffing.
that is so fascinating. I honestly I think that you stumbled onto something there that I think actually has had a real impact over the last couple of years. It's been hard to recruit. Fill percentages have been down. It's been hard to get talent, hard to keep talent. Retention rates are lower. And you start asking, where's the workforce? And it's people, the gig economy is consuming some of it. But now, if you think about it, if you're a recruiter and you're working a desk and you're trying to fill a role and you're calling people, if you happen to call somebody that is a Gen Z, and because they're in the workforce now, and they're typically the people that recruiters are calling, and you're like, hey, I've got this job for you. Can you interview today or tomorrow? And it starts like in a couple of days or it starts in a week. And if they need money now because they're economically pinched, then we're not competing against other agencies and we're not competing against, other even companies that are just hiring direct. Like we're competing against the DoorDashes and, Amazon delivery and, TaskRabbit and all these things where they could say, I would love to be on that interview, but I got to work today. Like I've got to go pick up a shift and I think that's huge. So if you literally were a staffing agency and you had some same day, like, hey, you can start work today and you get paid today. Like if you could offer at least that economic incentive to compete with what they're getting from like DoorDash and delivery dudes and Uber Eats and all that kind of stuff. And then also build out the tech stack so you actually have the gig economy type shifts. And then you got to change the client perspective because you're going to have clients that are willing to do that. But they're
Hmm.
coming, companies are coming around. Like they realize they're going to have to adjust flexibility. So I think you stumbled upon that. Like that might be one of the biggest competitors that we're dealing with is the person that needs to get paid now and they can't wait for our job. So we lose them because we don't have the mechanism in place to actually compete where they need us to meet them at, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I think you nailed that
Wow.
right on the head. I think that you nailed that right on the head. We, as a generation, again, just we don't like to wait. We don't like to wait at all. Not for anything. Not for the job that starts tomorrow. Not for the interview that's next week. Not for the pay that comes biweekly. We don't like to wait. And so the faster you can do it, the stronger you can do it, the more immediate that your product or service can be for this next generation, the better off you'll be.
So that's amazing. And that's really where I wanted to go with this as well to the staffing agency that is recruiting Gen Zs. So it sounds like they're going to have to respond quicker when a Gen Z indicates interest. They have to stay more engaged in the conversation. They can't wait days between email responses or whatnot. They have to respond quickly, interview quickly, place quickly, or they're going to lose the sort of the attention span of that Gen Z candidate. Right? Is that I'm hearing that right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that I mean when you're playing with different fields of employment, those metrics will shape and change just kind of based on the natural makeup of the individuals that you're working with. So if you're talking to a group of executives, perhaps they're going to be a little bit more patient. They understand the game that's being played. But if you're talking about laborers, if you're talking about sending people out to work quickly in more unskilled demographics, yeah, faster, quicker, everything is going to be that way. And so even for us, our current agency, one of the things that we're doing is sending working interviews right now, just because the retention rate is so much better for it. And that's one of the things that we can do to kind of help that area.
So how did you get your clients to get on board with the concept of working interviews? And are they paid working interviews or are they not? How does that work?
They are paid working interviews. We really just work it out to our customers as they have the final say. If the candidate comes in and you interview them and they're horrible, you can send them home. That's always in your power. But if that candidate comes in and you liked them and you want them to work for you and you have an open role, why not put them to work right now? They're in your building, they're ready to go, they want a job. Throw them in the seat and see how it goes.
Love it. Love it. So when you think about expediency and better, faster, quicker, all of that stuff, what are the communication tools that happen? Because there's no tool that's quicker than picking up the phone. Yet there's this stigma that Gen Z is not going to answer. Like they'll see the missed call and they will text you back, right? Like that's like that stigma. So is that? Hopefully that's not shocking to you, but right, like
No.
and so, but with that, like, what are the communication tools that are going to be expedient enough to keep the process moving fast, yet meet Gen Z where they want to be met? Is it chatbots? Is it text messaging? Like, what is it?
That is a really good question. I think that the problem between communication and Gen Z is not the metrics or technology that's getting used, but the barrier between Gen Zers and the people that they're connecting with. And
Mm.
so technology is great. But a phone is a phone, a text message is a text message. We all know how to use technology to communicate. We just are exiting the COVID world. I mean, we understand technology and how to talk with one another, but the barrier there, I think, genuinely falls back to fear. And I think that my generation of Gen Zers is terrified of your generation and boomers. But I also
But
think that
rightfully so. I'm
boomers,
pretty
your
intimidating.
generation, yeah, right. But I also think that boomers in your generation might be slightly intimidated by us. And so I think that there is just kind of a barrier in the middle of communication where we don't really understand where the other person is coming from or what they genuinely want. And so that gap is going to be more important, in my personal opinion, than the technology that you're using to bring the message full circle.
Okay, so how do we bridge that gap?
Good question. Good question. I think just more vulnerability and transparency is what is really important. I think
It's
that
very hard. That's very hard for boomers and Gen X. We're not vulnerable. No transparency here.
no transparency. Well, that's I would encourage you to increase that yourself there. But no, I think that boomers have an amazing amount of information that they have obtained through the past years. And I think that Gen X has learned how to manage people and they have grown with social responsibility and they've really tuned into that domain. Um, and then Gen Z's just kind of come up behind it all and catch it and throw it in a little ball together in my mind. And so I think that the more we bridge that gap, the more communication flows down, the better the technology gets utilized, the better the management gets utilized, and it just continues to evolve for the better. The more
So
that the generations combine.
I think that's an interesting perspective. And I honestly, so I've got maybe a contrarian take on this. Like I don't believe it's specific to boomers and X's and millennials and Z's. Like I think that it's probably the disconnect has been like that over like I believe that at one
That's
point,
fair.
you know, the generation X was the millennial or was the Gen Z to whatever was, you know, the greatest generation. Like I think that it's always been like that. And I think it's part of the maturation process that we just go through and the life experiences we have that shape us along the way. But that being said, like how do you I feel like what I see in the marketplace and compounded with what you just shared, I feel like you get the boomers and the Gen Xers that have been like, I've been there and I've done that. Like I've learned this through real world experience and I can be confident in my own knowledge and expertise that I've gained through working. And I'm not going to be intimidated or replaced by this brand new, wet behind the ears Gen Z person that thinks they know it all and they act like they know it all, right? Like that's that perspective. And then from when I see Gen Zers come up and I feel like they discount the the knowledge that they have and they're like, oh, you don't really know it all because what you know is from a world that doesn't really exist anymore. Like the world that we live in today was shaped by and for millennials and Gen Z, and it's not a world that Xers or boomers are accustomed to. So your knowledge isn't really as useful as you think it is, boomer. Like, okay, boomer mentality. So like I feel like those are the two sentiments on each side of the equation. How do we really get people to say, yeah, you know what? You learn some fundamental tasks along the way, and you learn those lessons that can benefit me and hopefully shorten my path to success. But then also have the boomers in the top side of the generation say, yeah, you know what? You're pretty smart. You're intuitive. You see the world a different way, and you can probably run faster. How do I learn from you? Like, how do you get people to have that, ask that sincere question and listen to each other?
Hmm.
That was a lot. I'm sorry. I'm just fired up now because this
No,
is
you're
what I care
you're
about.
you're good. I'm just really trying to process your question. I think that that conversation needs to be incredibly intentional. And that's such a hard conversation to be intentional because it's really awkward, right? For 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 these different generations to mix, for the diversity of that to really come together. I mean, if you think about it just in a normal family dynamic, when you all get together at Thanksgiving, it's a little uncomfortable and awkward to sit around that table as it begins. So if you take that into the workplace and you drop them all around an executive table, it's going to be an interesting conversation. And so I think that really the key there is intentionality, is trying to look within your team of team members and to say, who do I have that's on this platform? Who do I have that's on this platform? And how do I put them together so that they can communicate and really value one another's input? So in our team, we've got some really amazing new interns, and they're amazing. They're Gen Zers, they're hungry, they're humble, they're ready for work, they're excited.
Wait, whoa,
We've
whoa. Did you just say Gen Zers were hungry? Because I've heard this is the laziest generation. There's these big social influencers that like own social media platforms that say that there is this. So you've got hungry Gen Zers. How do you find those people and keep them hungry?
you I don't know how you find them. I was not a part of that process. Recruitment is not my strong
Do
suit,
you? So let
but
me.
how you keep them, I can address that
Okay,
topic.
all right. That's because I want to go there too.
So the key for us around creating hungry interns has been, yes, using them for what the jobs need to be done. So most of our interns are sourcers. Most of our interns also have a very small piece of our marketing department. And that has been a new transition, but we've brought all of them in and give them each a slight responsibility in the marketing department and a couple hours a week to do what they need to do for that area. That has been our key kind of piece in my perspective because they love it. They want to learn about it. They've been told their whole lives not to waste time on it. And so now that they're having this opportunity to really fine tune that and not only grow their personal brand, not only grow the brand of the company that they're working for, but really spend time on things that they're interested in and excited about, keeps them coming back Monday through Thursday so that they can do their Friday tasks. And so it's not just getting those Gen Zers through your door and being like, okay, yay, we've got a diverse team. That's great. No, it's about getting those Gen Zers through your door, creating a diverse team, and then creating opportunities for them to show where they can be unique and different. And so that's kind of been our key piece to keeping them hungry.
I I love it, and I got two perspectives to share on that. One of them is an idea, but so I don't agree with the sentiment that Gen Zers are lazy. I don't. I think
I
that probably
appreciate
I
that.
think that every generation has probably been built by that by a couple generations above them, you know,
Mhm.
because it's typically a misperception. Like it's just you don't do work the way that I do work, so you're lazy, right? Well, that's not true because work, like the way that work needs to be done, is always changing. But if you
It
think
just
about
means
what
they
you
don't
just said,
understand it.
not even that. I don't even think it's complete understanding. Actually, I think that they understand it differently, right?
Hmm.
Because they got a different perspective, right? If you're like, and here's a perfect example. How do you copy and paste? What do you do if you're going to copy and paste something from a Word document over into an email? How do you copy and paste?
How do I copy and paste? I would take my mouse, drag it to the top, drag it to the bottom, double click, copy, scroll to the next page, paste. That's how I copy and paste.
Okay, so I copy and paste by doing the right click and copy and like select like and then paste using the right click and But I've got a Gen Zer on my team who is absolutely amazing, and that method drives him nuts. He's like, "Why are you right clicking to copy and paste?" He's like, "Why don't you use keyboard shortcuts?" And I'm just like, "I never learned them, right?" And you know what?
So I'm not smart enough for
Right.
that.
Like that's just not how, like, I just do it this way because it's what works for me. But one way is not right or wrong. It's what's
It's
better for
just
the
different.
individual, different understanding. But so this is my thing. So I don't think they're lazy. And I don't like I like people like, oh, they're not hungry. Hunger is an appetite. If you think about the actual word, hunger is about appetite. And appetite is how much you're willing to eat, right? So hunger is about being fed. So I think that if you have a boomer or an X that's saying, oh, these Gen Zers are not hungry enough, it's because you're not feeding them enough. You're not giving them enough opportunity to eat.
Mm,
Because the bigger our
absolutely.
appetites are, the hungrier we're going to be. Because that's how appetite works. It's a consumption method, right? So like if you want Gen Zers or millennials or any worker, it doesn't even matter what their generation is. If you want someone to be hungrier, you have to feed them to build their appetite up to want more of it. Kind of like you said, you basically come in, you give them opportunities and you give them more opportunities and you start to see their appetite develop. And when appetite grows, hunger follows, right? Like, so like, I
Hmm.
think that's the perspective. And then the other idea that I have is we have these DE&I, diversity initiatives, and what we do is we say, hey, we've got people from all different races, origin, backgrounds, whatever, and they make up a team. And the whole point of it is to get different perspectives. It's very celebrated, it's very wise to get different perspectives, but no one has applied the same concept to generational diversity or generational perspective. So I think if you really want to leverage the power that each generation brings to your workforce or your staffing agency, sit them around that Thanksgiving themed executive conference room table and say, hey, this is the challenge that we're facing today. Maybe it's not getting enough talent through the door. Boomer, how would you solve this problem? I'm going to do this, this, or this. Generation X, how are you going to solve this problem? Well, I'm going to do it this way. Okay, millennial, how are you going to solve this problem? Oh, well, I would do it this way, this way, this way. Gen Z, how are you going to solve this problem? Oh, I would do this, this, or this. And someone's documenting it. And you're probably going to get the most holistic, better recruiting approach to get more people through your door just because you got the best 360-degree perspective on how to solve a problem today.
Hmm.
And everyone's opinion would matter at that point. And you're not making it about the generation, you're making it about an idea that's piecing together the puzzle to make you the most competitive staffing agency in your market. Is that, when I say that idea to you, how do you feel about that being a Gen Zer? Because I think it'd be awesome if I was in that room as an X.
I think that is amazing and exactly what needs to be done. I think that the more you open up seats for the next generations to come and sit at the table, the better perspective you will have, the more understanding you will have about where they're coming from and why they do what they do. And if that's your, let's use this example of recruiting employees, your candidate target market, you're only going to be more better off. You're only going to be better off understanding more about that generation or that person just from bringing those people into the conversation.
Awesome. I love it. So I got two questions. One is sales related because I know that's where you live. So I'd be remiss if I didn't pick your brain on this. So buyers, when I was coming up through the sales ranks and staffing, buyers were greatest generation, boomers, and some X, right? So now buyers are very few boomers because they're retiring on, but predominantly X, millennials, and then Gen Z is going to start infiltrating the target buyers, right? Your HR managers, your kind of middle management and up, things like that. What's the best way to sell to someone in that demographic, like a millennial Gen Z? Like, how do I sell my staffing services to them?
Millennial or Gen Z? I think that when I attack a millennial or Gen Z, attack is such an aggressive word.
Yeah, that
Sorry,
was a
that
very
that
brutal
that
word
came
right
out
there.
that came out
Wow.
there. But no, when I'm having a conversation in a sales meeting, now you all know kind of where I
You're a
lie.
sales shark, trained ninja. If you're listening to this interview right now, just know this about Hannah. She is a shark. She is a trained ninja assassin salesperson with the Gen Z perspective. So continue. Sorry.
Anyways, so when I attack that person, no, when I'm having those conversations, Really, what I try to tune in on is one, technology, and two, personal connection, and kind of how we pair those things together. And so for us, for our specific company, we're not a 2 feet in a heartbeat kind of company. We don't want to send you the next person that walks through our door. Not a chance. We want to understand what your company culture is. We want to understand the people that these candidates will be working with and working under. We want to understand the company values and morals. And we want to find a match not only for the role, but for the company so we can create a lasting partnership. And so that's kind of the personal key that we play there. And then the technology part. Technology will forever continue to be incredibly important. And so if you're not innovating it, you're not going to be making that much money. You can have as many connections and personal interactions as you want, but if you don't continue to up your technology, it's just going to be really challenging for you to continue to scale. And so we talk a lot about the technology that we're creating for both our candidates and for our customers and how they can kind of play inside of all of that and what that will look like for them while we work together.
So that's incredible. That actually makes a ton of sense. If you think about the common denominator of everything that you've said about the Gen Z perspective, about flexibility and culture and maybe purpose-driven workplaces and technology, like these are things that are very important to millennials and Gen Zers historically or stereotypically, and they've been a little bit less important to Xers and Boomers or anything like that. So that's really how you need to shape the unique value proposition of your company if you're explaining it to that person. If you're selling to a millennial or a Gen Z and you say, hey, the reason we're the right partners is because we focus on all these things, they're more likely going to be the underlying priorities of that person you're selling to. And if they feel like your company is built in a way that aligns with what's important to them, they're probably going to value you more than someone that says, oh, well, we cold call 100 people a day and we do all of this and we don't really need technology because it's a people business. Like that might be a turnoff to some newer generation buyers, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, you can make 100 calls and that's great. But if you don't know how to measure it, if you don't know how to track it, if you don't know how to retain that information appropriately, what does it matter?
It doesn't. I'm a data guy. It doesn't matter.
I know you are.
Wasted effort. Wasted effort. Awesome. So the last question that I have for you is how, if I shouldn't say if, because like this is the track that you're on, is like opening up offices and running agencies. How does the staffing agency today, what should they be doing to best incorporate Gen Z generation and use the talents they have to grow and be successful? What should they be doing today to really grow their agency considering Gen Z?
Think one of the, and this will throw you through a loop because we haven't actually touched on this yet, but one of the most important parts for agencies as they move forward is going to be looking at the skill gap that's continuing to grow and figuring out how to help and best support these generations who are going to continue to move forward and choose not to become professionally educated in reaching those goals. And so, what I mean there, because that's perhaps a little awkward of a statement, is that people my age are growing up and information is free. Education is free. You can go on YouTube and learn anything you want. I have a great bachelor's degree that I could have paid $0 for and printed off of my computer and just did a bunch of YouTube research on. And my generation will continue to look at that as information continues to be more public. But past generations really value education and diplomas, and rightfully so. Finishing a degree gives you a lot of amazing things aside from just finishing power. But as we continue to grow up, or not generation gap, that skills gap is going to continue to grow. And so for next agencies or for agencies looking for kind of what to do in the future, figuring out how to close that gap and help promote the individuals from underneath up is going to be really valuable in finding candidates that you can both retain and support well.
I love that. And actually, something that you just said triggered another idea that I want to see if you think it's good. So, one area that I believe that a lot of agencies struggle in a little bit, or they neglect a little bit more than they should, is training and development of their internal staff. And there's a lot of great trainers and coaches out there. I know we've had, Danny Cahill on Staffing Monthly. We've had Tom Erb. Like these guys are, they're amazing trainers, right? So, a lot of training and development people out there, but sometimes it's hard to connect it with people without disrupting your operation, especially if you're in the small to mid-market staffing agencies. So you could actually source a lot of this knowledge out there, and create a learning library internally for your agency that's sort of in bespoke kind of bite-sized pieces about best practices. Like, how do you find a candidate? How do you do these things? And like, you could almost create like a YouTube sourced or online, learning sourced learning library for your own company and make it available to your entire workforce. But I feel like it would be more appreciated by some of the younger generations that's used to learning that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But not only your internal workforce, but as well as your external workforce. Like the candidates that you're bringing in, it depends on the roles that you're placing them for, but they're human beings. Human beings like to learn. We do. And so giving those candidates, giving that pool of candidates the opportunity to have more than just your jobs is really interesting because that's going to form the way that they feel about your organization and their desire to stick and tie themselves to your name.
That I agree. I agree. And I think that's amazing perspective. So, Hannah, I am really thankful and grateful that you were to come on Staffing Monthly this month and just share the Gen Z perspective and talk about the way that you see our industry, the technologies that you see shaping our industry, and really the way that we need to be moving as staffing agencies to not only just incorporate or accept Gen Z, but really to leverage the strengths that they have and kind of combine them with the strengths that come before them in other generations to create a more, I guess, a holistic approach to recruitment. So I'm just thankful for your perspective and the insights that you shared.
Well, thank you. I was so glad to come on today to have this opportunity to chat with you, Dan. It's been really quite enjoyable and such a pleasure. So thank you for having me.
So I've got two last. So contact, if anyone reaches out to you or they want to get a hold of you and say, hey, I'd like to pick your brain on some of this stuff or see how we can get better leverage the Gen Z perspective into our agency and maybe shape us. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at Hannah MacDonald, and that's a capital DMAC with an H on the end of Hannah. So you can find me there. You're also welcome to reach out to me through just email, which is Hannah at bettertogethergroup.com, which is super, super easy to spell and easy to remember.
Awesome. And I will put all of those links down here too.
I appreciate
I
it.
know you're going to kill me for bringing this one up. I saved it to the end in case I need to edit it out. But do you want to talk about your book project that you're working on and going to be releasing hopefully in 2023?
Absolutely, I would. I would love to talk about that.
All right. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to let the cat out of the bag too early, but let's. So, what is this book you're working on? Why is it important? And when can we read it?
Oh gosh. You can read it probably before the end of 2023. I'm really hoping and expecting that it will be published. I have connected with my first publisher as of right now, and I'm just kind of in the midst of discussion and what that will look like. And so really trying to understand how we'll move forward with it, which is exciting. And I'm super thrilled about. But no, the book at whole is kind of meant for graduating students, so people who are between the ages of 18 if you want to graduate high school, or 22 for graduating university. And really, the novel or book is kind of written as a coming of age story. And it didn't start out that way, but that's really what it turned into. And it's really meant to be just kind of like a warm hug from an older sister to understanding the
Oh,
concept of that period of life. Because when you're graduating, it is terrifying. It is lonely. You're moving away from your friends. You've just created a life in a different city or a different place that you're now ditching and moving away from. And that's really overwhelming. You've spent an immense amount of money to get a degree that you now don't really know what to do with. Perhaps you're starting a job that you're figuring out you might not love. Maybe you're living back with your parents. There's a number of things about the process of graduation that can be really overwhelming. And so it's really just written as a story to show you that those things are normal and those things are natural. And the best thing that I learned to do in those moments was really just tune in to understanding the good things and the bad things. So the good moments and the bad moments, and being able to love the good moments despite the simplicity of them. And so when the world can get really hard and really challenging and everything feels so overwhelming and we're waiting for that next big thing, that moment doesn't need to come from getting married or having a baby or getting that perfect job that you love. It could be the joy that you feel from riding on a motorcycle and seeing fireworks go off behind you. Or that's one of the stories that I wrote. So that's why that comes straight to mind. Or
I was like, wow, that sounds like an action movie, but that's cool.
no, or being really sick and having your mom come and pick you up from camp and the joy and love that you felt in those moments. Like that's one of the stories that I wrote. So it really is just kind of trying to fine tune those little pieces of your life that may not feel like such a big deal, but that eventually evolve to be the best parts of your life, and really just remembering and taking note of those intentionally.
Well, I love it. I am looking forward to reading it when it comes out because I know that I'm going to have that sort of insight to guide my own kids through that phase in the coming years. And I think it's going to be certainly on point what we talked about today. I think it's going to give insights into that Gen Z perspective. And we've talked about this, your topic of this book a little bit in the past, and it's important to me because I think as the world gets shaped with some of the mental health issues that we're experiencing or seeing today, with these generations that are sort of coming of age and entering the workforce, there's a real need for that level of understanding about how do we actually adjust to it, accommodate it, and try to maybe even in the workplace, how do we find those little moments that can be meaningful and bring joy and happiness to a Gen Z recruiter? And how do we
Mm,
actually, kind of, I don't want to say manufacture, it sounds a little too artificial, but how do we curate that type of environment intentionally in the workplace to support our younger generation workers? I think so. I'm looking forward to that. When it's going to be released, we'll have you back on the show for sure, just to talk about it and kind of highlight some of those stories. But I'm looking forward to it, and thank you for sharing that.
well, thank you. I appreciate you asking. I'm super excited about what it'll be in the future. So I'll be very excited for that conversation as well.
Awesome, everybody. Hey, listen, go check out Hannah MacDonald on LinkedIn. Follow her. She puts out some amazing content. It's really, really insightful, and it's usually a pretty short read. So I think she's definitely writing for, people that are busy, or maybe even just want to get through content quickly. But definitely check her out. Follow her. She's an emerging leader in the industry. And Hannah, thanks for being here.